Do you want me to do the intro, Emma, or you got it?
Oh, yeah, if you wanted to. It's probably the last tasting of the year. I better let you get a word in.
It is the last tasting, not probably. We are done now. Well, firstly, thank you all for joining tonight. This is our very last tasting of the year. So many familiar faces. So to all our tastings that everyone's attended, thank you. Emma and I have had an absolute blast going through hundreds of whiskey samples, as like many of you have this year. So if people are still keen and interested to keep doing them next year, we'll keep doing them for as long as people keep buying the virtual kits. We have a few different types. Obviously, these top shelves are designed at cracking open and tasting whiskey that is normally out of the crazy price ranges. Like we're drinking, I think the cheapest whiskies in Aussie at $300. There's a $900 58-year-old Armagnac on taste tonight. The expensive Bunnahabhain Fèis release from '98 at $800 as well. So there's a few interesting and weird drams. There's a rum included as well. The whole point and theme of tonight's tasting, we figured, was we called it favorites, but really it was these wonderful drams for whatever reason did not make it into another virtual tasting this year. Some of them like the WhiskySponge Westport, which only just arrived. It was meant to be in the WhiskySponge tasting we had 2 nights ago with Angus. So other reasons we just didn't have a Highlander in tasting this year to do the Highlander in range. So we figured we wanted to definitely crack into this Oishii whiskey, which we will very shortly. Emma, do you mind on putting the order in?
Yes, I will sort that. That was the one thing I didn't prepare. Is the order.
That's all right. I believe I didn't give you a poll from the other night, so I'll set the poll up as well. So Emma will share the tasting order in a second. Obviously, don't drink and drive. We record all these tastings. It's a small tasting group, so feel free to throw in your tasting notes or questions into the chat. Otherwise, just put your hand up and you can unmute yourself if you want to ask verbally. We don't mind. The only thing I was going to say is don't if you have 6 glasses, pour all of them out into 6 different glasses and let them breathe. That Armagnac really needs to breathe. I think the Bunnahabhain is quite a sweet dram, and I think some of the savory notes after letting it breathe 10 minutes in the glass start coming through as well as it oxidizes a little bit. So I think all of these drams do well with letting them breathe. So if you can, grab your 6 glasses and pour your samples out, and we'll get into the first one now, but otherwise, let those whiskies breathe. I think that's all from me. I might hand it over to Emma to kick us off. Just the tasting order for those watching later on and can't see the chat. Number 1 will be the Highlander in 35-year-old blended grain, then the WhiskySponge Westport 17-year-old, the notable age statement 58-year-old Armagnac. We've switched that in. It's quite a lighter whiskey compared to some of the sherry, so we've just moved that to position number 3. Then the Bunnahabhain 98 Manzanilla. I can never pronounce that one. Amber Lane Apera 087, and then finishing off with a crazy I can never pronounce that one
I
as well.
did not even attempt to spell it, even though I have the sample in front of me. I went on pronunciation to try and discover how it's pronounced. It's Uitvlugt.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Dutch city Utrecht. It kind of has that kind of vibe to it as well, but maybe that's just the spelling. But yeah,
They're both Dutch, so.
But
yeah, well, good.
Emma, tell us about this grain.
Awesome. Yeah, we might get underway. And like Ollie said, definitely one where you want to have multiple glasses because the Armagnac is super interesting. So whiskey number 1, the Highlander in Oishii whiskey, 35-year-old blended grain. So obviously one of the independent bottlers that we love, Highlander Inn. I feel like this bottling totally flew under the radar, so much so that I didn't even know about it, or I did and someone told me and I've got a short memory. But yeah, so obviously the founder of Highlander Inn, well, not the founder, the owner, because he came into the business after they'd already started bottling. Tetsuya is Japanese man, and I feel like Japanese whiskey drinkers have a higher reverence for the quality of grain whiskey far more than Scottish people do. Obviously, grain is an important component in a lot of blends, but I just think it doesn't get to shine as often on its own in the Scottish market. Even though these barrels have been around for yonks and yonks, and they've got some insanely old grain whiskey because it holds up better with age. This was one of 7 grain whiskies or blended whiskies so far under the Oishii whiskey release range with the green labels. I don't know if Ollie's got one for show and tell for display. But all of the bottlings in the Oishii whiskey are either grain or blended whiskey. The youngest, which I believe was from last year, was a 14-year-old single grain cask. And there's a 38-year-old blended Scotch that tops the age, but most of them sit around the 35, 36-year-old mark. Oishii whiskey is just Tetsuya's name for the range. It translates to delicious whiskey in Japanese. So yeah, there's a whole bunch. They're really, really cool. And the label art that he sources for this range come from a man named Takeshi Abe, who is also one of the artists who did some of the art for the Ichiro's card series. So very well-known Japanese artist. And because we were saying before, this is a blended grain. So it could come from a number of grain distilleries in Scotland. There's significantly less grain distilleries, obviously, than single malt distilleries, but most likely, in my opinion, and I don't have any facts to back this up, I couldn't find anything Tetsuya had written about it or where it came from, but most likely to be a blend of, or a good portion of, North British and Invergordon grain, since they're some of the most prolific in terms of selling casks to independent bottlers. So you will often see an Invergordon less often the North British, but they still are kicking around. Meanwhile, someone like Girvan doesn't really release to IBs, and Cameron Bridge is pretty much exclusively for Johnny Walker and the Diageo products, outside of a rare random Cadenhead's bottling. So yeah, I'm super curious to hear what everyone thinks for tasting notes. Obviously, it's just family tonight, me and Ollie, and then all you lovely regulars and familiar faces. So if you wanted to kind of unmute and give a tasting note or ask a question, I will try and answer as best I can. But yeah, we don't have a special guest, so it's just all me tonight. But yeah, super curious to see what you guys think.
I was going to say, Emma, don't know why my video just stopped randomly. All these Oishii whiskey labels, because Highlander Inn is based in Scotland, in Speyside, but he's got other Highlander Inns. Most of them are in Japan. He's got one in Osaka. He's got one just opened in Indonesia.
Oh yeah, that's right. Malaysia or Indonesia?
Yeah, Malaysia as well, I believe. So all these bottlings are kind of made for the different bars, and then they always feature a character from one of the bars. So you have sort of the main owners, sort of little graphic. I think one of them was the famous painting of the supper, but each character was a different animal, and each animal represented one of the bar owners, for example. So there's baseball card collections. There's one of Tetsuya himself giggling like a small child because he loves his old and rare whiskies. So
yeah, it's a super cool range, and like even Tetsuya will kind of say that grain whiskey and blended whiskey was really where he like fell in love with Scotch as a style, and having that like kind of point of difference, but still all those like old world characteristics that you get in Scottish whiskey. with a grain. Like it's like reading a paperback book versus a hardcover book. It's like they're both the same book, but just obviously one feels fancier and whatever. But you know, there's still so much incredible quality within. You know, it doesn't matter what's on the cover. So, Michael, yeah, I definitely get that sourdough vibe from the grain whiskey. It feels so youthful, I suppose, for 35 years old. Like, yeah, I've got I think I've got some of the 14-year-old one, and that was like big and crisp and appley and you know, very Irish almost in a style, and this kind of hints at that as well. It's like, you know, I've still got life in me yet.
I was going to say, and maybe this is just my own personal preference, I'm not the biggest fan of grain whiskey, or I thought I wasn't with the ones I'd previously tried. And then I ran this experiment. So I got, I believe it's called Dumbarton, which is a distillery grain 14 from the Society, 30-year-old. I opened it. I did not like it at all. It tasted almost bitter to me. And I was like, am I missing something that the grain whiskey experience? One of the bartenders at Whiskey and Elements actually said, let it breathe, like forget about it for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. I've had this one open for about 2 years now, and I'm coming back to it, and it is probably one of the most flavor diverse whiskeys I have. It is like absolutely sensational. So a little hot tip from our favorite bartenders down in Victoria there. If you're not enjoying a grain whiskey, open the bottle up, let it breathe, and come back to it after a significant amount of time, and it will do something. It's spent 30 years in the cask. This one, how old is this one, Emma? This one's 35 years. You got to let it breathe. You got to let those flavors interact. It's just been doing nothing for 35 years, but sitting in a dark warehouse, chilling basically. And because Scotland doesn't have the extreme temperatures, the interaction of the wood is just time and a very long time. So yeah, if you're finding this whiskey a bit light or bland or anything like that, the hot tip is to open your bottle up and come back to it after a while and see how it goes.
Yeah, and look, that's not just for grain whiskey. Sometimes you'll find a single cask, single malt that kind of behaves the same way. Again, at Whiskey and Element, there was a Society bottling collaboration they did, the first one they did, triple berry Lamington cake is what it was called. They're like rare as hen's teeth now, but I remember when the bottle first came into the bar and we opened it, we sipped it like straight from the neck pour, and Brooke's like, oh no, what have I done? Like I've picked a whiskey that I'm not happy with. It tasted so good when I got the samples. And we were like, let's just leave this bottle. No joke. Left it on the bar top with the cork off for 2 hours. Put the cork back on, put it back on the bar, and we tasted it after being left open for 2 hours, and we were like, oh my god, this is so good. Like all the coconut, all the rich raspberry jam came out of it, and it was all down to it just needed to blow off some of that early alcohol. So yeah, I definitely, if you find that something is too hot, obviously smaller time increments, we were pretty comfortable assessing that 2 hours would be enough. But yeah, it's definitely one of those tips that I think we don't really get told enough. And it's not that a single cask is too hot or awful in some way. There are some that are awful and can't be fixed with oxidation, but always try and give it a little bit of breathing space to give it a great chance. I mean, I've even tried non-cask strength, non-single cask whiskies that needed air, like Ultavine has a core range release, no age statement. I did not like it when I first tried it, and I went back to it 2 weeks later and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And it's like a $70 core range bottle of whiskey that needed air. So yeah, James, definitely a creamy dram, really nice. Yeah, creamy is definitely the way to go. And I mean, like, it just goes to show how underrated grain whiskey is, that it's still a great dram. And for its age. I don't know the prices. All I know is the prices, but like I think it's pretty affordable for what it is. And yeah, for a single malt of the same age, you'd have to sell your left kidney and your first child. So, but yeah.
See you later in the
All right.
tasting.
Yeah.
I'm going to share the code earlier now anyway. So those are the whiskies that we do have in stock, and we are doing 20% off tonight using code FAVE23. But if you click on that link, it will put the code in automatically. So
yeah, there you go, Michael.
Almost as bad as Chris. Not quite, but almost.
Maybe just half a kidney in your second born child. There you go.
Oh, I am looking for a 50-year-old, so it's like, yeah, it's about that.
Yeah. Well, we might have to chat about that when we get to the Armagnac later. But we'll pop on to whiskey number 2, the WhiskySponge Westport 17-year-old. Like Ollie was saying, it didn't arrive in the warehouse until like today. Yes, oh, not today, like the other week or whatever. Only very recently, which is probably a good thing, because if I had seen it, I would have nabbed it for myself. Nobody would have gotten any. I absolutely love Westport. It's one of my favorite teaspoon drams. So Westport is obviously teaspooned Glenmorangie. It's one of those names where Glenmorangie knows, and they kind of don't really, they're happy with that name. They like that name for their teaspooned drams. Traditionally, Westport used to be teaspooned with Glenmorangie single malt, because they were both briefly owned by the same parent company. But obviously that is no longer. Glenmorangie is owned by La Martiniquais. Yes, La Martiniquais now. And Glenmorangie belongs to Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, LVMH, big fancy group, alongside Ardbeg. So today you will occasionally find Westport teaspooned with Ardbeg, but they will still often teaspoon in using Glenmorangie just for old time's sake. So they might just grab a bottle of Glenmorangie and dump it in the barrel, which usually works. But older Westport expressions used to be, some of them used to be even 50-50. So it was more of like a blend rather than an actual teaspoon. But yeah, so the label for this one is really fun. And Ollie, I don't know if you have it on hand easily again as well. But everyone who has attended a Decadent Drinks tasting with Angus before, he absolutely loves taking the piss. He doesn't like to get sued. Nobody likes to get sued. But he has an insatiable need to poke fun at industry people. So on the label of this one, which is third from the left, he's included a giraffe named Professor Jill Bumsden, which is, of course, no relation to Dr. Bill Lumsden. But yeah, he thought he'd sneak in a joke. Actually, Ollie, I think I took a screenshot of the back label as well, which features a series of books written by Professor Jill Bumsden, which are hilarious. But yeah, so I was really curious when I saw this label. I was like, why the hell is Glenmorangie so obsessed with giraffes? And the reason that they're so interlinked is because their still neck is the same height as that of an adult male giraffe. Obviously the average neck height of an adult male giraffe. And so for them, it was sort of like, well, you know, like this is a bit of a weird, quirky fact, so we're going to run with it. Yeah.
Can you see that? Is that zoomed in enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We got what? The Men of Tranquility and other short erotica volumes. Like what? Whiskey marketing in zero gravity, or how I put the NAS in NASA. A long and winding Willy joke, teaspooning and teabagging critical theory for the modern distiller. Like, Just, I buy these bottles for the back label as well, mostly. But yeah, so very, very fun, very, very cute. Published by LVMH Diageo paperback division. So funny.
He's playing with fire there. I love it.
I know, he absolutely is. But yeah, and obviously with the giraffes, they're now the official kind of symbol of Glenmorangie Distillery. But you guys will be pleased to know, like I was, that they have a Giraffe Conservation Foundation. So at the very least, they're committed to the protection of their mascot, which is really sweet and really nice to see. But the whiskey itself, this Glenmorangie, is from a single refill hogshead. So flavor profile will probably be closer to the and more similar to like the 10-year-old and the Signet style of flavor profile from Glenmorangie, rather than like the La Santa or Winter Reuben, which tends to be my favorite style of Westports, is the sherried ones, but those are like rare as hen's teeth. But yeah, really curious to see, Michael, you're getting green grass and mint on the nose.
I did, but it's kind of smoothed out now. I think that was early on.
Yeah, I get like white jasmine flowers. Like, still fresh, but it's like a little bit floral.
There's a little bit of like candy sweetness there somewhere.
Just going to add, Emma. So for those who haven't seen the distillery, it's very Scottish, like coloured doors, barrels everywhere. It's got a lot of stills. These are the second stills that they use, so the very tall ones. With they call them the giraffes. So when you're a big company like Moët Hennessy, producing, is it 20 million liters, Emma? This distillery, I can't remember exactly. It's a crazy amount. These are the second distillation run, so they have shorter, fatter stills. For the rest of it, but yeah, you can see how big they are with actual human next to it.
Yeah.
Well, you got to pump out all of that base Glenmorangie, right?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, and now obviously as well, for as traditional a distillery as Glenmorangie is, they've now stuck what they're calling their lighthouse distillery, which is a mini experimental distillery lab for Dr. Bill Lumsden, like right in the center corner area. But for a very traditional distillery, they are really leaning into this modern experimental style, and we've obviously seen that with the Tale of series over the last 3 years or so, maybe longer. But yeah, they're definitely getting a bit weird and a bit wacky with some of their Glenmorangie releases. Yeah, and I believe that they're doing quite a significant amount of experimentation with their regular.
Is that because they effectively have to diametrically oppose what they're doing with the rest of their whiskies, which has been super available to everyone?
I don't necessarily think so. I think look, in my opinion, how I see it is they've taken this really weird, fun, wacky Ardbeg kind of idea, and all the releases that they're doing, and having fun with the committee, like the Ardbeg committee members and stuff. And I think they want to bring that youthfulness into Glenmorangie. I think that, from my perspective, so like Glenfiddich changed their bottle design a few years back now, and they were like, we want it to look more modern and more fresh. And Glenmorangie's changed their label design twice now. Thankfully kept the bottle shape, but I kind of get this feeling that all these older school traditional distilleries are like, so we make great whiskey, like there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to appeal to a younger demographic now, because our older customers are not going to be around a lot longer. So we need to make sure that we pivot and draw in a younger consumer. And even Glenfiddich's doing these youthful ads. You guys might have seen them at bus stops and stuff like that, with the fashion models holding a bottle. And it's like, you don't drink that. None of you drink that. But yeah, so I think it's it's less so that they're trying to distance themselves from their very everyday core range. I think that it's more they've got their everyday core range, they're giving it a fresh label and a fresh look, but then they're doing these more experimental things where they can pull in media, they can pull in marketing, and they can pull in PR teams to really like make a splash, so that people who were not into whiskey was like, cake, that sounds great, I want something that tastes like cake, and or forest, or whatever it happens to be with the other.
Well, it's part of what comes when you get bought by a large conglomerate like that. You inherit their marketing team,
Yeah.
and I suppose they're they're told to not just hit targets, but I mean the point is it's the growth of the brand, and you're not going to grow it by staying the same.
Well, I think it's that thing as well, because for LVMH, I mean, like you look at their the way that they put out their financial statements, they don't even have whiskey as a separate category. They own 2 distilleries, but they fold it into their cognac and other spirits. So cognac gets a mention, but their other spirits kind of fall by the wayside. And I think they're trying to pivot and be like, okay, how do we really bring it to the forefront? And I mean, you look at what they're doing with Hennessy, right? Like they're straddling this line with Hennessy cognac, where it's cool for the kids because rappers drink it and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time it's still old, refined, and dignified. And so I think I just used an SMWS flavor profile praise for that. but yeah, and so I think they're kind of trying to do the same thing with their whiskey brands, less so Ardbeg, more so Glenmorangie, and be like, oh, we're hip, we're with it, but also like we can still appeal. You can still buy a bottle for your granddad and not feel weird about it. So that's kind of how I see it. I don't think that they think about their whiskey as much as we think and hope perhaps they do. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they take this Tale of series and start kind of, all right, what's the next cab off the rank? Because I mean, from the way Ardbeg's going, it's going to be more no age statement releases and more experimentation, but whether that works for them long term is yet to be seen. I know that like a lot of older whiskey drinkers are like, what? So we'll see. It'll come down to whether or not it works for them over the next period. Yeah.
I don't know if it's the 38 degrees in Sydney today, but this whiskey, I was expecting it to be more like gentle, a lot more fruitier, and it's quite hot. Like it's got a lot of body to it. It's got a lot of flavor. I'm enjoying it. But yeah, it's at 55%. And 17 years old. I don't know. Maybe I've just had another older Glenmo. I was just thinking that's more like I think North Star did one or something. Or Cadenheads, you mentioned one before, Emma. But yeah, this is quite warm or hot and as a dram. It's nice. It gives it texture and body.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot more of, if anyone's had Glentorquers, it's got that kind of spiced biscuity creaminess that Glentorquers tends to have. Yeah, if you gave that to me blind, I'd say it was Glentorquers, not Glenmorangie. But yeah, I quite like it. Quite like it. Yeah.
I was going to add, I just went back to the Oishii, and already in 10-20 minutes, it's evolved again. I'm getting dehydrated strawberries, a bit of strawberry cream notes, Michael, kind of the creaminess comes through, but it's also the jamminess you get from some sipping rums right on the front of your palate. It's not molasses sugars, it's just like a nice rummy vanilla rumness. I don't know what flavor note it is there, but it's evolving already.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, we always encourage to keep a bit in your glass and go back to it a bit later to see how things change.
If you can handle keeping some left in your glass.
I suppose the question becomes at those price ranges, like it's very diminishing returns. It's like these are great, however, it's like you start comparing it to some of the other glorious things that you have provided to us this year, and it's real hard. It's real hard. But that is, again, that's probably surprisingly good. It's like, would I go back and necessarily go directly to it to buy something? I was like, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about WhiskySponge in particular is they're all very different and they're all great drams, like baseline, solidly great drams. And then from there, it's sort of like, okay, this one is way better. This one is fine. Like, I think we had the Decadent Drinks virtual tasting the other night, and the Tullibardine was kind of, for a lot of people, they're like, oh, super interesting and like super leathery. And I was obsessed with it. I loved it. But that's because I like those weird sherried whiskeys where they taste like bacon jam. But yeah, but everyone agreed. They were like, this is a great whiskey, but it's just not my vibe. It's not my, and I feel like, yeah, the Westport's a little bit that. Do I wish it was sherried? Yes. Am I still enjoying it? Very much so. But we might get on to the monster of a not whiskey. I think Ollie accidentally called it a whiskey earlier. But yes, so this is the one that I was most excited about. The no age statement 58-year-old Fèis Armagnac from 1963. Maybe
I was just going to add, whilst it is an expensive dram, and I think one of the most expensive on the night, it's 58 years old. The 50-year-old Glendronach, which came out last year, has a price tag of $49,000 as a comparison.
Tell me
the
about
50-year-old, 50-year-old Macallan, or 70, it's like $78,000. So these French spirits, I don't know how they can make these so affordable compared to equal age statements in Scotch. I don't know if the demand's just not there, but yeah, once you get over 30-year-old in Armagnac land, you just have layers of flavor. It needs time to breathe, and already just nosing it is super special. But in terms of, if you want something that's old or you want to impress someone with a great age statement, again, it's on these notable age statements are part of the decadent drink ranges. So Angus puts a giant number on the front, and he really wants to notify you on how awesome they are with their ages, and there's less about price and more about accessibility with something that you may not look into normally. So I think it's quite cool. On that note, I have to run. I have another engagement, so I'll leave you in the capable hands of Emma. I'll just set up the poll for you, Emma, but otherwise I bid you all a good night and have a safe and Merry Christmas, and catch you in the new year.
Take care, Ollie. All right. Yeah. So like Ollie was saying, it just the value for money on, in particular, Armagnac. I feel like cognac gets a little bit more recognition because it's obviously much more well-known spirit style. But even after the Decadent Drinks tasting on Tuesday night, Angus and I were chatting for a little bit, and we were both remarking about how insanely good French spirits are and how overlooked they are. I think he was saying, he was like, I get a sheet and I look at the age and I look at the price and I'm just gobsmacked. It's like, this is like crazy affordable for like what you're getting. And then the guy will be like, oh, and yeah, for you there's an extra % off because you're a good customer, we like you, whatever. And he's like, this is already so cheap. Like, how
He's just been sitting in a French cave for like 60 years.
Yeah, pretty much. It's such a cool thing, is that a lot of Armagnac and cognac producers lay down spirit knowing that they're probably never going to live to see some of it bottled, like most of it bottled, which is absolutely insane. So yeah, and I'm showing my age a bit here, but it's not often I get to drink something that's almost twice my age. And yeah, the only way to do it is with French spirits, pretty much, nowadays, without breaking my bank budget and remortgaging my house. But so this is a Fèis Armagnac. So Armagnac's one of the oldest style of grape-based spirits and wine-based spirits. And it's divided into 3 regions. So just like cognac is one region, which is on the west coast of Bordeaux, Armagnac has 3 separate regions. You have Basse Armagnac, which produces about 57% of the Armagnac that we see on the market. You have Ténérez, which produces about 40%. And then you finally have Haute Armagnac, which barely produces like 3% every year. The area was very prolific, but it never recovered from phylloxera, which swept through Europe. It's another fun fact, after phylloxera swept through Europe, France and Spain came to Australia to take a lot of grape clippings, because we had brought clippings over to Australia from France and Spain in order to grow our vineyards, and Australia wasn't hit by phylloxera. So you had all these producers who were like, our crops are destroyed, we would love to continue to use, you know, our traditional genetic, I suppose, grapes. Can we have some clippings to take back home? So yeah, a lot of the grapes grown across Europe were from Australian wine clippings, which is really, really cool. There's 4 grape varietals that go into Armagnac, 4 main ones. There's technically 6, but 2 of them are like barely used. So the main ones are Uni Blanco, Colombard, Folle Blanche, and Baco. This Armagnac is from Chateau de Gaube, which primarily uses Baco grapes. And this is bottled at a natural cask strength of 46.3%. It's absolutely insane how how much flavor and how long it takes for the ABV to drop so far in Armagnac and cognac. And yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think and to hear your tasting notes on this, because obviously very different from what we normally drink.
It's very interesting. I get like a slight chemical note on the nose and the palate. I don't know if that's because of the time it's spent in the wood or the soil in that region, or just because I've never had something like this before. But yeah, it kind of reminds me of like carpet cleaner, like a very floral, like carpet cleaner. Like you have that chemical smell to it, but also you get that floral and sort of sweet aspect. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's
Yeah.
right.
No, that makes total sense. It's like when you're buying like kitchen cleaner and they've got the violets, because I get a lot of like fake violet flavor on this. And yeah, and it's just like, makes your kitchen smell nice, and you're like, I can still smell the chemicals through this, but like,
yeah, it's like the artificial sweetness that they put in, obviously, to the cleaners and stuff, that even though, you know, I don't think they've put any artificial sweetener in here, but yeah, it's just that interesting sort of chemical sweetness. Very
yeah,
nice.
absolutely. I will say, so this is the first time I'm trying this NAS Armagnac. At the Sipping Spirits show up in Sydney, I tried the 49-year-old Armagnac sponge. I rate the 49-year-old over this. I think, Michael, you can probably check what year it is. That's probably as close to a birth year, 50 year.
Yeah, close. But was that the Armagnac that we had in a tasting sometime this year? There was like a 48 or 49 or 50. Wasn't that long ago.
So I think that there was a 50-year-old, but let me see if I can.
Remember the one where we did, there was the cognac and the Armagnacs and something like that.
Yeah. There was one where he did the rums as well. It might have gotten.
Might have come in that one.
Yeah, might have gotten a little bit lost. So this is the Armagnac sponge, the 49-year-old that I tried. So yeah, I think this is probably one of the best Armagnacs I've ever had. I haven't had a massive amount, but yeah, I think this one definitely definitely takes a cake. I remember there was a bar, I can't remember, some bar in Canberra who bought a bottle and they opened it and they turn around to Scott and they were like, it doesn't taste like it's 49 years old. I'm like, it tastes good. What are you talking about? I'm like, what do you think a 49-year-old Armagnac tastes like? Oh, you got them coming out the wazoo. So but yeah. I think for me, I definitely personally prefer that one. But I do think that this has, I think it probably is down to the grape as well. Bacco grapes do tend to be a little bit funkier and have that little bit like shoe polishy kind of sharpness to them.
You say that it's just missing some body to it, possibly in the age.
Yeah, and I think as well the with the ABV that it came out to as well.
Yeah.
But again, we had much higher cask strength whiskies before this as well. So it might definitely be something to go back to on a fresh palate and kind of see how it stands up on its own.
We'll say once again, even at that ABV, there's a stupid number of layer of flavors in that though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. But yeah, for me, anytime I have to get like a birth year bottling for anyone, cognac or Armagnac is the answer.
And to be honest, that's probably more drinkable to a lot of people than say like a high ABV, like birth year kind of thing.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, it's like at the price point that you're getting for it, like I wouldn't be opposed. So cognac and lemonade is amazing. It's super delicious. It sounds so bad. Like obviously, like wouldn't necessarily recommend a 58-year-old Armagnac and lemonade, but if you're in the mood and you've got it there, yeah, cognac and lemonade is definitely a drink that I love to have. And so yeah, especially if you go, I've got 2 Armagnacs recently that are my sister's birth year bottles, and neither of them drink, so I'll just enjoy them on their behalf. I'm like, I'm drinking something that's as old as you. but yeah, it is very cool. And the great thing as well is most, especially like small bottlings of the Pinot de Chantres is a nice one. Yeah, so good. They had the Pinot de Chantres at the Sipping Spirits show, and I was like, I want a bottle of this, and then they sold out, and I'm like, I'm sad. I'm gonna have to call them now. But Pinot de Chantres is, I believe it's called a Mistel, and it's grape juice with the cognac spirit, so it's a bit fresher. But yes, so in France, in order to say that this is X years old, they have to go through this process of every year a guy has to come to the chateau and look at the barrel and check the barrel and be like, yep, it's the same barrel I sold last year. You get another year on it, and it's an expensive process. Nobody can be asked, which is why you have VSOP, XO as the main kind of indicators of age in cognac and, well, less so in Armagnac, but in cognac. So mostly you will find distillation years on bottles of cognac and Armagnac, because that is something they are legally allowed to put on the bottle without having to pay through the nose for age certification. But then when you get into independently bottled stuff, if it's outside of France, free for all, which is why Angus can put 58 years on it, even though most likely Chateau de Gab did not do the whole process of, you know, how long of having someone come out every year. But yeah, which makes it really easy to find a birth year bottle, even if it's not as old as you, it's distilled in the same year, whatever happens to be. All right, let's get back into some whiskey before we finish on rum.
Would you interestingly say, because that one is because Armagnac is column stilled and cognac is pot stilled, would you then say that, you know, Armagnac is closer to Scotch whiskey than, say, like cognac is theoretically then closer to Irish whiskey?
I mean, well, because cognac is typically alembic stills, which are slightly different to pot stills, mostly in the neck portion. But yes, I know it's very, very similar, very much the same. And yeah, Armagnac predominantly do use column stills. I think that from the diagrams that I've seen, the column stills that they use in Armagnac are kind of a column Lomond hybrid, so they're a little bit chunkier than your regular column stills. So actually, I think I have an image which I will bring up for you guys. Yeah, I think that just because grape spirit is so different, like the base is already so different. Yeah, I'm not really, look, I can't really say either way. It's not my speciality, as it were. But yeah, so alembic de Armagnacs, so they still consider it an alembic still, but it is a little bit different, a little bit chunkier. You still have plates in it, but yeah, it's not as typically in the way that we would think of column stills in grain production or in American whiskey production. So, but I suppose you'd probably get a cleaner spirit out of it. I think that's why I personally prefer Armagnacs, because they do tend to be cleaner. But I think a lot of it comes down to the specific grape style. Like for me, Uni Blanco grapes, I'm buying a bottle. Like if it's an Uni Blanco cognac or Armagnac, I'm getting a bottle. In cognac, it's Bois Ordinaires, I'm getting a bottle. So I think it's more like, you know, red wine, white wine, the difference between a Riesling and a Gewürztraminer and a Sauv Blanc, rather than, you know, column and pot, if that makes sense. But yeah, all right, moving on to the Bunnahabhain Manzanilla Fèis. So this was the top end premium release for Bunnahabhain from this year's Fèis Festival. This heads up made it into Chris's top dram picks for the year. He's obsessed with it. He's probably on a second bottle. But this was distilled in 1998 and filled into American oak casks for the majority of its life. It was then finished in, I say finished with quotations, in first fill Manzanilla casks for 7 years, which is kind of not really a finish at that point. It's a double maturation at that point, but that is kind of a typical finishing period for CVH and the distilleries in their portfolio. It's, you know, they really commit to finishing a whiskey for a good period of time and not wasting that secondary part. Oh, caramel milkshake on the nose. Yeah, it's got a little bit of like Ferrero Rocher as well. Like when you first peel the foil off and you're like, it's still a little bit metallic, but you're like, I'm putting it in my face now. Yeah, so they really went heavy on the fortified wine casks for the Fèis Festival this year at Bunnahabhain. So you've obviously got the Manzanilla, which is a drier style of fortified wine. It's very nutty, a little bit earthy, touch sweet, less sweet than Oloroso, more sweet than Fino. And it's only made in a couple of different regions, a small region. But then there was the core release was the Canasta cask, which you guys might have seen was through the Whisky Club recently. I think people were like, is there more coming? I don't know if there's more coming. I hope there's more coming. But yeah, that one was amazing as well. But yeah, they're really leaning into sherried stuff at the moment for Fèis. It'll be interesting to see what comes out next year if they take like a hard turn and kind of go back towards more American oak casks. I'm hoping that they bring out a rum cask again at some point. I think Bunnahabhain does spectacular in a rum cask, but hasn't had that many chances to see the inside of one, apart from an accident at the warehouse where they were like, oh yeah, we filled all these casks. It's like, oh, and the rum one. And the distillery manager was like, the what? Like, yeah, one of them's rum. And it's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Now we have to go hunt for this bloody barrel. Like, it was just like, it worked out really well. And he's hoping to obtain a couple more rum casks to fill, whether the company knows or not.
That is extremely tasty.
Yeah. I think this one, again, is one that definitely benefits from time and oxygen. I remember when we first had this at the Fèis show in Melbourne this year, I tried it from the neck pour. Again, I was just like, this is good, but I think the Cask is better. And for me, I'm always thinking about that limited release 11-year-old Manzanilla cask they did, which just so good. But now that I've had it with a bit more oxygen in it, I think this is beautiful. And it's still got a refinement, but it's got a self-assuredness, I think is probably the best way to describe it. It doesn't feel super young, but it doesn't feel super old, and it's very well-rounded and very settled. See why Chris picked it. James says fruit chocks galore. What is a fruit choc?
Must be an SA thing. It's basically chocolate covered sort of like apricots, like sort of bite-sized things. So and they have sort of like chocolate covered like almonds and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, I think those are just go to the market and get those in a little baggie of whichever my favorite is. I will say, now you're talking about chocolate covered fruit things, it does remind me a little bit of Clinkers. It's got a little bit of that when you bite into like a strawberry Clinkers, that like, I don't even know how you would describe the inside, because it's like a honeycomb kind of thing, but it's not honeycomb flavored. Yeah, but all right. Well, there's not a whole lot to say more about that one apart from it's delicious. And I take it by your silence, you'll kind of enjoy that as well. Lots of nods. And I'm very conscious of time as well. Don't want to keep you too late for our last tasting of the year. So we might move on to whiskey number 5, the Amber Lane Apera cask. Now, has anyone had this one before already? No? Cool. So I worked a whiskey show for Rod and Amber Lane, and I was like telling everyone and their nan about this whiskey. So I'm like, it's been around for ages. It's awesome. So yeah, obviously the Whiskey Lift, we love and adore the team at Amber Lane. And it's not just because their whiskey is amazing. It certainly helps, but Rod and Phil are some of the loveliest people ever. If you ever get the chance to meet Rod, he's absolutely wonderful, just big sweetheart, time for everyone. And I think I love those kinds of people where it's just like, you make amazing stuff, you do some incredible things, but you're sitting here having a chat, having a beer with me, and like, you know, just hanging out. It's so beautiful and wonderful. And one thing that Rod and Phil do particularly well with their whiskey is they do amazing sherry bomb whiskies. Obviously, we bottled a PX cask with them last year, I think. They do their annual Sleigh Bells release, obviously very thematic at the moment for Christmas. They do their Sherry Lane, and this one in particular is a single cask French oak Apera barrel from McWilliams Fortified Winery. And they rarely do single cask releases from the distillery unless it's for a collaboration. But when Rod came across this barrel, he loved it so much on its own, he couldn't bear to add it in with one of their other sherried releases. And I think the point of difference and what makes their sherry cask whiskies so good at Amber Lane is their style of maturation. Obviously, we just tried an Armagnac. Rod loves French spirits. He and I bonded over chartreuse, which is wonderful. But he really likes the way that they do maturation in cognac and in the cognac region. So they don't keep the spirit in the same barrel for its whole lifetime. They move it from barrel to barrel. So, spend a couple of years in one cask and then a couple of years in another, and so on and so forth. And they're constantly rotating, and they've got what are called sacrificial casks. And those barrels are designed so that they top up everything else. So the whiskey in those barrels, cognac in those barrels, and the whiskey in Amber Lane's case in those barrels tops up all the other barrels so that there's never that much, there's minimal oxygen and minimal space in the barrel. So you're getting a full contact of the liquid with the wood. You're not getting parts that are touching it more, touching it less, all that kind of stuff. And it's a really great way to even out the maturation, but moving cask to cask, you're getting a really rich flavor profile. You're taking on all those flavors without over oaking. I always like to describe it as like making a cup of tea. Like if you left a tea bag in a hot water for like an hour, it's going to be intense and bitter and like too much. But if you leave that tea bag in for a minute and then you take it out and then you put that tea bag in another thing of water and then you take it out and put it in another thing of water, like you're going to get a more steady flavor profile without overdoing it. That's kind of how I describe it so that it makes sense to me in my head. Other people are like, that's a lot of effort. I'm like, yeah, it's a lot of effort, but the results are good. So, it's kind of worth it. But yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about it. I think this is, the most sherried on the tasting, technically.
Again, a quality sherry bomb as opposed to so many other non-quality ones.
Yeah. I find for me, this reminds me so much of those like the like Glenrothes, that Glenrothes kind of grape candy almost flavor to the sherry. It's like it's sweet, but it's that like fake American grape flavor that is sugary but isn't overpowering. And I think that's what I like best, is very distinctly sweet, but it's not oversaturated, but then it's also not super oaky. I think it's just that beautiful rounded mix.
I don't know if it's me, but I'm getting quite a lot of like Tic Tac minty elements to it on the nose and the palate.
Yep, that kind of wintergreen mint almost.
Yeah, that's correct.
I had to explain what wintergreen mints were to some of the guys because Chris and I are American, so we know what wintergreen is. Is absolutely like unnatural mint almost.
Are they the ones that just like literally burn your mouth with just
Is
like?
that the fisherman's friend equivalent?
No, because this is what wintergreen Altoids is my go-to. It's so hard to describe. because I think that there's this like, it's like American cinnamon is different. American cinnamon is spicy in the way that like chili is spicy. But yeah, wintergreen, I think they pick the leaves when there's like berries or there's a fruit or it's a slightly different plant. I'm not 100% certain. Yeah, it just says sugared, natural, and artificial flavors. So who knows?
All the flavors.
All the flavors. Yeah, but wintergreen is a very distinctly American style of mint that is still identifiable as mint, but it's got this high tone sweetness to it, like this ice cold kind of. I think that's like those chewing gum ice or whatever is probably the closest flavor comparison. That have that like massive cooling effect on your tongue and stuff. I know what you mean. I kind of get that mintiness, that like that wintergreen mintiness.
I think
However, the
Fisherman's
mouthfeel
Friends
is
are
like-
like just brutal, aren't they? Just like absolutely, just like annihilate your mouth, basically, just like fresh mint and just like very cooling.
You will be fresh and you will like it, or else it gets the hose again, that kind of thing.
It's one of those ones where you like you eat it and you're like, I breathe cold fire. But yeah, no.
The mouth feels very different to the nose. Like, very, very different.
Yeah, it's got a bit of that like allspice berry pumpkin pie spices sweetness to it, like allspice and a little bit of nutmeg and a dash of clove. But yeah, I'll be curious to see where the poll goes tonight, how everyone kind of votes, because it's a wild ride so far. I can't believe none of these have been in a virtual tasting this year, especially the Apera. The Amberlane Apera is so good. Now, the final dram of the night. You even call them a dram, I suppose. Now, this one I'm relying wholly on you guys for tasting notes, because Ollie puts me in charge of these tastings and then forgets that I can't drink rum because of potential allergy. I'm definitely allergic to Flor de Caña rum, but I don't need my throat closing over. Much as I love you guys, I'm not willing to risk it. So yeah, I will rely on you guys for flavor notes on this one. But yeah, number 6 for the night, our last drink, is the Rumsponge Edition 22 Uitvlugt. I'm going to say it multiple times and butcher it each time. 25-year-old Guyanese rum. So Uitvlugt is the name of a small village in the West Apera region of Guyana, which is not far from the coastline. And the name itself comes from the Dutch, because we always think about how the English traveled and, told people this is mine now, and we forget a bit about how the Dutch got around and were stamping their names and their mark on a lot of different countries as well. Nearly Australia, but they apparently landed in I think they landed somewhere in
Western Australia as well, and
yeah,
there's also East Coast somewhere, but definitely Western Australia.
Yeah, they landed
Tassie? Because
Possibly.
Tasmania, yeah, it used to be Van Diemen's Land back in the day, which is like a Dutch name.
Well, because remember, didn't they come down and I think they tacked around Tasmania and then went over to the West Coast, and that's where they mapped the Van Diemen's Land.
Yeah. Oh, look, I get my history from the old Adam Hill sketch of the Dutch landed in an area that was quite swampy, and they're like, "Oh, this is not great. We're gonna leave." Like, and then the English came. We're like, "We can work with this." But yeah, so yeah, the Dutch were obviously
The
very.
English got stuck in a harbour for like 2 weeks because they were too stubborn.
That is very English.
Mm.
Can confirm. But yeah, I think there's a pluckiness to the British colonialists which cannot be understated. But yeah, I think I was listening to something and they were like, the British SAS are the toughest in the world for no other reason than their training ground is England, which is not only cold but wet, so you get like trench foot and all that kind of stuff. It's like in Norway, yeah, it's cold but it's dry, like it's just snow. In Britain, it's wet. So I'm sure they tell themselves that to make them feel better. But onto the rum. So Guyanese rum production has been around since 1732, when Port Morant was opened nearby to where in the West Maria region, and Uitvlugt was established by a Dutch company not long after in 1750, which is crazy to think how long ago this was. The original distillery used a double wooden pot still. So the still itself is made of wood, which is bonkers. And it created a really heavy style of rum, which is something that they continued throughout their lifetime of production. In 1975, the Guyanese government had this really great idea where they started privatizing sugar plantations and their attached distilleries, because obviously you had the sugar plantation, the molasses was a byproduct of sugar, and so every plantation had its own distillery in order to make rum and, you know, use it as currency and then pay sailors and whatever. But yeah, they started privatizing these plantations and distilleries and amalgamated all of them into one giant distillery, owned by a company that was then called Guyana Liquor Corporation. Unsurprisingly, it was a bad business move to remove all competition and only have one supplier for the entire bloody country. So it led to the closure of Uitvlugt in the year 2000. And it only left one distillery remaining today. So there's only one Guyanese rum distillery left called Diamond Distillery, which actually uses the old Uitvlugt stills, which is pretty cool. So this bottling is, I believe, was distilled in 1998. So it's the last 2 years before the distillery was closed for good. So yeah, obviously not a lot of it left kicking around, and not a lot of Guyanese rum left kicking around, as it were. I don't know the production quantities of Diamond Distillery. I don't know if they're producing a lot, but from, if you've ever tried any Port Morants or anything like that, Guyanese rum does tend to be very chunky, not quite as far in the same way as something like Hampton Estate from Jamaica is. Jamaica? Yeah, I think they did. Like, I find that those rums tend to go a bit cheesy, like blue cheese, but yeah, definitely a lot of body and a lot of heft to it.
This is quite
Fun.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say this is quite tasty and smooth and like sugary vanilla-y on the mouthfeel. Like for a high ABV rum, it doesn't necessarily have some of that like nasty alcoholism through it. It's actually quite like it's there, but the initial mouthfeel really smooths this out as you drink it.
Smells so good. It smells like vanilla slice.
It's definitely a little bit funky though. Like I get on the nose, especially just like a little bit of Play-Doh and super glue. I know. Doesn't sound appetizing, but yeah, it's interesting, very funky.
Depends on how much Play-Doh you ate as a child.
Especially if it was like that homemade Play-Doh where like it was just like a whole bunch of salt and like corn flour or something like that. But you would have to like try and put sugar in it as well to make it less offensive if your kid actually accidentally ate it, though I can't imagine that you'd want them to eat it. But yeah, no, it smells amazing. I love and appreciate rum so much. One of my favorite rum distilleries is Foursquare from Barbados, but yeah, I can't take the risk. It's heartbreaking. But yeah, is anyone here kind of like really into rum? Kind of a big rum drinker? No. Are we?
It's one of my first ever rums that I've had. Like besides the $60 spiced rums from Dan Murphy's, this is probably one of the proper ones I've actually had ever.
Yeah, it's so cool. We're like, I mean, look, core affordable rums, great, sure, amazing. But like when you get into those like really cool old craft rums, it just takes it to a whole nother level. And you get some like amazing. There's some that just taste wild. Wild is kind of the only way I could describe them. Like I was saying, I tried a 27-year-old Hampton estate that was just like gorgonzola blue cheese. This is before I was like, I'm not risking drinking many rums anymore. And I was like, I hate this so much. I'm fascinated by it, but I hate it. It's like that kombucha meme where it's just like, yeah. So yeah, I'm thrilled that this can be like a really cool, fun, like fancier, and single cask rums are super, super cool. Super, super cool.
Yeah, it's like a different beast. It's like in a different lane compared to, the cheap rums. It's sort of like if you were to do a blind tasting with this and like a $70 spice rum, you wouldn't correlate them as the same, as rum. This is on a different level for sure.
It's slightly different than Captain Morgan, yes, but Captain Morgan is still a quality product.
I can have Sailor Jerry because it's not technically rum, and I'm pretty sure neither is Captain Morgan. I can have Sailor Jerry, and I only use it for espresso martinis. Sailor Jerry makes the best espresso martinis you've ever had in your life. I've tried nicer rums like Diplomatico. I've tried Captain Morgan. Has to be Sailor Jerry.
No Kraken?
No, I've tried Kraken. No, it's got to be Sailor Jerry.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I find Sailor Jerry's is, I know it's a different beast to Captain Morgan. It's like they're the same, but very weirdly different.
Yeah.
Even though they're kind of they're in the same segment kind of thing.
Yeah, Captain Morgan leans more towards like a proper rum, whereas Sailor Jerry very much leans into the spiced, almost liqueurish style, which is, I think, what works for it. But it's the vanillins and the caramels in Sailor Jerry that make for a great espresso martini. But enough about cocktails. I think it's probably time to run the poll, and so you can vote for your two favorites, which gives you space to do a whiskey one and a non-whiskey one if you want, but they can be both whiskey. It's totally up to you.
It's hard because everything on this lineup is like really different. Like it's not 6 different sherry bombs or 6 different ex-bourbon casks. They're all very different, so it's hard to pick a favorite.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. There's kind of like no common ground on any of them, actually. It's like,
I really wanted to like that Armagnac more than I did, but the slight lack of body in it, it's funny because you actually start tasting the grape juice underneath, and it feels like it's like a bottle of wine that you've put down and it's run out of oomph to actually keep aging. Not quite getting to that vinegar level, but it starts kind of losing body at that point. Although this one has the complexity of flavor that a wine of that age would not.
Yeah.
Wines tend to like go here and then it goes vinegar, right? Whereas this one, it's like it's all there, but if that had a tiny bit more body to it, it would be a like super fantastic bottle.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know if we have any samples of the 49-year-old Armagnac sponge, but I highly recommend trying it if you can justify getting a sample of it. Yeah,
It's a pretty reasonable price at that. Like the 50s, what, £260. What's that? 491 Australian.
yeah,
For a 50-year-old, I was like, eh.
yeah. Let me see if I can find it on our website. Oh yeah, the 49 is $4.99 at one of our partner retailers for a bottle. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like an old friend, Luke McCarthy, always said if they're paying what is it, $10 for every year, like that's a good price for a bottle.
Yeah.
You're paying $180 for an 18-year-old whiskey, that's a great price. Like paying $4.99 for a 49-year-old Armagnac, like that's great. Yeah. All right, drum roll, please. Ta-da. I'm honestly thrilled to see that the Amber Lane is getting as much love as the Bunna. And like you think about it, there's a difference of shy of 20 years between the two whiskies. And they're both, yeah, so amazing in their own ways. But
We think about when the distillery's open, there's a lot more than that.
yeah, well, we are babies in comparison to Japan. I was talking to someone, they're like, well, Japan's relatively new to whiskey. I'm like, they've been at it for 100 years. No, they're very much well settled in it. But yeah, I think I feel like the Rumsponge is a bit too confronting to get any love, and the Highlander Inn was like too soon and too upfront to get as much love, but that's okay.
It's a very small sample size of people, though. Like I think they're both two very good liquors, but then you're putting them up against everything here. It's like, well, if you were going top 3 or top 4, it's like, yeah, you probably get something there.
Yeah, and hopefully next year Ollie and I can work out how to do the tiered ranking, so you can pick like number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, 6.
Or you could start planning your advent calendar now.
Considering how many open samples I have in my house, I can build like enough advent calendars for everyone, as long as you don't mind that they've all been opened and had a couple of drops taken out.
Just use tiny little bottles.
But yeah, well, thank you so much, guys, for joining me tonight. I know we ran a little bit over time, but I think it was great. We had some great chats and whatnot, but thank you so much for joining us at this last tasting of the year. I will see you all in the new year, I'm sure, either in person at some of our shows or on the next virtual tasting. I might end the recording there and say goodnight to everybody watching at home, and might continue with you guys